Great. Good morning.
Good morning.
So I'm Meg Weston, and my guest today is Kevin Pilkington. And Kevin is a member of the writing faculty at Sarah Lawrence College. He's published 9 collections of poems, or is it 10 now? 9?
Who's counting? It's 10. I think. I'm not counting.
Yeah, over the years, he's been nominated for 4 pushcarts, and his poems have appeared in numerous journals and magazines. He's written 2 novels. His debut novel was called Summer Shares, was published in 2012, and a new paperback version is out. And a new novel is in the works. I'll ask you about that one. His most recent collection of poetry is called Playing Poker with Tennessee Williams, and it came out from Black Lawrence Press in 2021. And Kevin's teaching a workshop this summer on campus at Maine Media Workshops in college in August, and it's called Line by Line, a poetry workshop. So I've had the personal pleasure of taking workshops with Kevin, so it's a really delight to be able to talk with you this morning. I'm looking forward to our conversation. So first, I want to ask you about your novel that's coming out. What's the name and when will we see it?
The title is Taking on Secrets, and it'll be out later this year. I just finished the second round of edits. I chose a cover for it, waiting to get some blurbs for the back cover. But it's basically a coming of age story over a 4-year period during the Watergate era. It's a young man who graduates from high school, his first job in an advertising company, falling in love for the first time. He learns about racism. He learns that also that there's some really twisted, dark secrets in his background that he wasn't aware of. So he has to deal with all of that. And on top of that, by a fluke, he goes out and he has to interview a well-known comedian who's rather rude and crude. So he has to help him write commercials for television. And that's sort of a strange experience for him. And then he comes back and he finds out about what's going on in his family and has to deal with that. And is he in love or isn't he in love? So that's pretty much the synopsis of the story.
I can't wait to read it. And so what's it like to be writing fiction, and are you writing poetry at the same time, or do you switch back and forth? Do you wear different hats, use different pens?
Well, speaking of pens, I write everything in longhand, poetry, fiction. And I do that. Someone said, "Oh, isn't that strange?" It's not. I think a lot of writers write fiction also with. I write on a legal pad, and for me, I have more control over the language when I have a pen in my hands. I guess that's for my writing poetry, but for me, a pen is like a flashlight. Helps me see where I'm going, and I believe that I'm a better fiction writer because of my poetry. Poetry teaches you to be economical, pick the right word, or as Coleridge would say, put words in the best possible order. That's what poetry is, and the same for fiction. But I like to cross-pollinate. It's fun to write poetry and then switch over to prose. But when I'm working on the novel, I tend to put the poetry aside, which is good actually, because I can't wait to get back to it. So when I get back to the poetry, which I did this summer, I have renewed energy for it. I like many writers, I sweat over every word, in poetry, every word, every line, every space, every comma, I really obsess about it. I think it's one of the few good obsessions to have, to obsess about language. At least I tell this to students as well. I mean, if you obsess about anything else, it's not very good. If you obsess about food, you're going to get heavy. If you obsess about liquor, you're going to get drunk. But with poetry, it just enhances your life. It clarifies things. And certainly, I was talking about clarity. I realized how important poetry was. I always knew that poetry was important. Someone said to me, "Oh, they talk about poetry month in April." For me, poetry is every month. But during the beginnings of the pandemic, certainly here in New York, it was quite frightening. And I think we lost the first couple of months, thousands of people, citizens here. And poetry, I've always said, helps me clarify things. It helps me find my way, and it certainly helped me with during the pandemic. You know, it helped me sort of, how do I get through this? I'll get through it by thinking it out loud and you know, and following the language, and that's what I did. And I was surprised how many poems I've written about the pandemic or being involved, which I never thought I would. But it certainly helped me sort of recover also. And I'm still writing about it, referencing it. I wrote a recent poem, and I referenced, you know, the city after the pandemic and how it looks, and sort of getting back to, in quotes, normal kind of thing. But you know, the thing about poetry is it's sort of double-sided. It's a prayer in a sense, because you're praying for things that you hope will happen. There's also a sexual component too, on the other side of that, because you want to seduce your reader. So, you know, so as I'm praying on the poem, I'm also, I hope I seduce you and keep you involved with my poem, you know? So it's a double-edged sword, and it's a good sword though.
So do you think about your reader while you're writing the poetry?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Whoever,
Yeah.
and I don't know who the reader is. Just someone out there. Could be one person, 1,000 people. I always keep them in mind. I don't want to be rude. You know, I want them to know what I know. I want them to feel what I feel. I want to convey those feelings, because it's a shared human experience. That's the beauty about poetry, especially now more than ever, where, you know, you turn on the news and anything, how separate we all are, you know. But poetry is a way to rediscover our shared humanity, you know. And this is, you know, this is how I feel, and I'm sure you feel the same way. And what, you know, what a good poem does, it puts its arm around your shoulders and says, this is what I've experienced. Have you experienced something similar? And because you are human as well, you'll say, not exactly that, but something very similar. That's how we come together with poetry. That's how important it is, you know.
It's one of the things I really love about your poetry, Kevin. I find it really accessible. I mean, understandable, and yet it's also nuanced. It has all of these layers that I can continue to discover and surprise me, but I don't ever feel like it's obscure or it's something that I'm too stupid to understand. It
Stupid, you're not.
communicates.
Well, thank you. When I first started to write, I can remember I came across a comment by Ezra Pound who said, "Go in fear of abstraction." Okay. And that stuck with me, and I learned that right away. And you don't want to write poetry that's difficult to read. You want poetry that's difficult not to read, you know. And you go back to Horace in The Art of Poetry. How many years ago is that? But he said that keep your audience in mind. So they have to know what you're talking about. Right now, what if you and I were just having a discussion here, which we are, and we don't understand one another? You know, it would be, what's the point? You know, and poetry, you want to, there's complexity, but you want it to be understood. You want to share your experience. And all experience is human, and so anybody can relate. But I make sure that my poetry is accessible with all the complexities that go with it. You know, the sights and sounds. And in poetry, I've gotten to the point where I'll use anything I possibly can to get the job done. Okay, so I'll use literary references. I'll use references from movies, radio, CDs, whatever it takes to get the job done. And that's important. And I think poetry incorporates all the arts. You know, there's visual, there's sound, of course, emotion, etc., etc. And great care goes into it. I go through, for short poems, I'll go through like 30 or 40 revisions, 50 revisions. It's nothing.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I just do. And I mean, you know, in the middle of the night when I wake up all the time and I'm thinking how I can change the world, for the better. But I always I'm thinking about a line that I can't quite get the way I want, you know, or does
It
this
just
word work?
sticks with you, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's an obsession, you know, and but it's an obsession I want, you know.
Yeah.
I want that, and when I'm obsessed or possessed or whatever, you know, it's I know I'm going to come out with some type of truth at the end of the poem, and the discovery there that I didn't expect, you know. So
How do you know when it's done? If you're going through 30 or 40 revisions?
yeah, you know, that's a great question. Sometimes it's a gut reaction, but who was it said? It might have been Auden who said he doesn't end poems, he abandons them. And a lot of writing poems like to use that. And I think that's the worst advice you can give anybody. You know, if you abandon something, you know, it's negative. You abandon ship, you abandon your family, you abandon your wife, you abandon your husband. But you don't abandon poetry. What I try to do is create a sense of resolution and finality that when you read the end of my poem, you know that's the end. It doesn't go any further. And I can feel it. You know, I'm so connected to the language, and I talk about this even in classes, you know, with students, that I'm so connected to the language that I can feel it. My response is also is obviously intellectual, but it's also physical, you know, and I can feel when the poem is done. I was working on a poem the other day, and I kept thinking I was going to add on to the poem, and I said, wait, no, I have the ending right here. It was in front of me for like an hour, you know. So, you know, it's a struggle, but it's a worthwhile struggle. You know?
That's great. Would you were talking about poems you'd written during and about the pandemic. Do you have one that you might read for us that's characteristic of that?
I don't have it with me. Unfortunately, I have other poems. I have other poems, but not. I'd have to get up. I'd have to get up and run to the next room, and that would kill time. So.
Well, we'll come back to that. There's so many things I wanted to talk to you about, and you've talked a lot about your creative process. What about some of your influences, poets or teachers? I read someplace that Dylan Thomas was certainly one of your major influences.
Yeah, he was an early influence. He energizes the language with his imagery, and you know, I think Shelley said, you know, metaphor energizes and revitalizes the language, and I, you know, early on I thought about that. I said, yeah, I think he's right. And then I stumbled across, I shouldn't say stumble, I had to read him in college, Dylan Thomas, and wow, the way he would bend language and the imagery he would use. You know, rather than saying I really enjoy being among the barns and the hay, he says I, you know, I was famous among the apple trees. And I thought, wow, yeah, what a nice way to say that, meaning that he loved being there. I was famous among the apple trees, something like that. And so he taught me about imagery and again, making the language vital and energizing it, you know, but also, you know, making it clear and concise. And then I mean, I have so many influences. You know, some of the romantic poets influenced me. A lot of contemporary people. I love Gary Soto. I like some later Robert Lowell, or later Theodore Recky. You know, different periods in their careers. But the list goes on and on. You know, when people ask me that, later on I'll think about 5 or 6 or 7 other people. But no, those are the literary influences, but there are also other influences as well, you know, just what's around me, you know, or the song lyricists who I think are wonderful writers. You know, there's a writer singer by the name of John Prine, who we lost to COVID last year. But he taught me about, you know, bending the language, about humor in work, you know, in writing, about being a bit more witty at times. But, you know, and he'll put a novel in a song, you know. Wow. And again, talk about economy of expression. So I'll use song lyrics in a sense. They inspire me as well. I don't pull from a song lyric to put into my poems, but they certainly influence me. Movies influence me. Images influence me. There's a famous a photo by Frank Cappa. His name is C-A-P-A. And there's this, and you know, you might have seen it. It's this famous photo of during the Spanish Civil War. There's a picture of a soldier in his sort of khaki uniform. It's black and white, and his knees buckle and his rifle is falling out of his hands. And Cappa took the photo the moment the bullet struck, and he said, the image is so clear because I got that close. And then later on, he said, the clearer the image, the closer you get, or the closer you get, the clearer the image. And I kept that, you know,
Wow.
that I have to get close to make my images that clear, you know. And so, you know, a photographer influenced my work as well. So there are all kinds of influences, you know. So and again, I put it all in. If I can use it to get what I have to get said, I will use it no matter what it is.
Well, it's all in there, and you do that, you know, with the use of metaphor and unexpected metaphors and these different cultural references, and of course, the landscape of New York and the sound of words and the playing with words and the humor in your poems. So, you know, the title of your latest book, Playing Poker with Tennessee Williams. I mean, yeah, you brought in a playwright here. You know?
Yeah. Okay.
Could you read a poem from this?
Yeah. I'm gonna write. Excuse me. Right. I wrote it already. I'm gonna read this poem. I think it's the very first poem in the collection. It's called Pomegranate. All right. And we talked about place is very important to my work. I think, you know, I know place or the landscape, surrounding landscape triggers ideas and feelings for me. So all my poems usually, I'd say 95% start with a place that I'm living in or visiting, etc. And I think the Irish poets call it place wisdom. And so I try to incorporate place wisdom into my work. So we feed off one another, the landscape and what I want to accomplish in the poem. And I'm lucky that I live in Manhattan because I mean you can walk down any street, you know, a city block, and there's like 30 poems ready to be written, or a short story or a novel just in that one block. You know, this particular poem, I literally looked out the window right next to me here, and I saw this sort of, you know, something similar happening here about this couple dancing. So I decided, well, that's worthwhile to put in a poem. So it's called Pomegranate. A woman walks by the bench I'm sitting on with her dog that looks part lab, part Buick. Stops and asks if I would like to dance. I smile, tell her, of course I do. We decide on a waltz that she begins to hum. We spin and sway across the street in between parked cars, and I can tell she realizes she chose a man who understands the rhythm of sand, the boundaries of thought. We glide, and Fred and Ginger might come to mind, or a breeze filled with the scent of flowers of your choice. Coffee stops flowing as a waitress stares out the window of a diner, while I lead my partner back across the street. When we come to the end of our dance, we compliment each other. And to repay the favor, I tell her, be careful, since the world comes to an end 3 blocks to the east of where we stand. Then I remind her, as long as there's a '59 Cadillac parked somewhere in a backyard between here and Boise, she will dance again. As she leaves content with her dog, its tail wagging like gossip, I am convinced now more than ever that I once held hundreds of roses in my hands the first time I cut open a pomegranate. So, I mean, I actually saw this couple dancing on the sidewalk, you know, and I think I just eaten a pomegranate about an hour earlier. So I put them both together, you know. So
I love where your imagination takes you.
Well, thank you. You know, and that, you know, Meg, that's an important statement you just made. the beauty of poetry is your imagination. You can let it soar. You can just let it take off and go with it. And you know, in prose, you're sort of chained to the page a bit more. You know, but with poetry, you know, you don't have to begin in the beginning. You don't have to begin at the end. You can begin somewhere in the middle. You know, and just let it fly. You know, and I have a great time. It's a great ride to be on. You know.
Well, I read, you know, someplace that Richard Hugo's Triggering Town was a significant work, or he was significant to you. And when I read that, there was a statement he made that I just found this great relief in. It was called, he said, there are no meaningless sequences. And you just reminded me of that when you said, you know, you ate a pomegranate an hour before, you saw people dancing in the street, and somehow they both appeared in your poem, you know?
Yeah.
And so the connection is you.
Yeah. I mean, I read where maybe it was Emerson who said poets are just sort of like the machine. So you sort of basically take everything in, it goes through you and onto the page, you know. So in a sense, that's what we do. We, you know, I always tell students, keep their antenna up, take everything in, you know, because you can use it at some point, you know, and don't overlook the little things. There's nothing too small to write about. There's nothing too insignificant to write about. Everything can be written about, you know. So.
Yeah, I want to talk about teaching a little bit. I've had the gift of taking your workshops, and what's been so wonderful to me about your style as a teacher is you pay attention to every single word, every line and every word. And I felt understood what I might have been wanting to say and what I said on the page in a very different way. And I think that's an incredible gift to your students, because you realize if I didn't say what I thought I'd said, and also if I did and somebody got it, you know, that it's there. So, you know, I thought maybe you'd talk a little bit about your philosophy in teaching and how you work with students.
I think that what I try to do is you know, come to the poem with respect with the student or the poet has written, and listen to the language, and literally word by word, line by line. And there are a lot of workshops now out there, and they have these sort of wonderful titles, you know, very flowery, and you know. What they're going to do, you know, flying with the eagles, in your poems, et cetera, finding where you live in your poem, and it's great, it's wonderful. Okay, but the point is that it all comes down to examining the language, you know, meticulously looking at it, being absorbed into the poem itself. And I love getting into a poem and moving around, so I have to take it word by word, because every word has to count. All right. And when I do that, I want the poet I'm working with to listen to the language, to develop their ear. An ear is very important. Without a good ear, a strong ear in quotes, you'll never be a good writer of poetry, prose, whatever you're writing. And listen to the sounds, you know, the heavy vowel sounds or deep sounds. You know, the consonants are higher. They're like musical notes. So that's the way I listen to a poem. And I want to point that out to poets, to listen to the language and trust the language, you know. So, you know, a student might have an idea where the poem is going, and they realize after we start talking about it that they're going in the wrong direction. So to pull it back, okay. And many times you don't bring a finished poem to a workshop. It might be where the poem begins. All right. So in other words, you know, you might have, well, like, this is what I want for this poem. And then you realize, well, I'm not really getting there yet, you know, and talking about it word by word, line by line, all right, and listening to the language will get it and energize it, you know, and work on the architecture of the poem in the class to make it much more successful and vibrant. So, I mean, that's a basic approach. And what I also do is I also make sure that I meet individually with every student, because I know they have questions about their work that they need they need answered, and I do that at Sarah Lawrence. I've been doing that at Sarah Lawrence for years, and it's very helpful for students, a one-on-one also. So, and that's important. But also, we talk about the sounds of the language, and there's the the noise of the poem, and then there's the quiet in the poem as well. How important the quiet is, the silences. Theodore Recky said he wanted to get his silences more accurate. So there's a silence at the end of the line. There's a silence in between stanzas, and that's just as important as the language that's being used. So that's sort of a quick general.
Go ahead. Well, no, I wanted to say I've seen you work with very beginning poets in your workshops, and in the same workshop with more experienced, and you've given them each equal respect, I think, to their voice and their work. I'm wondering, what would you say, because the idea of taking a workshop might be really frightening to somebody who's just starting out. What would you say to them about the value of coming to a workshop and how to approach that?
Yeah. First of all, there is I guess you have to be somewhat brave, no matter what stage of writing you're at, because you're exposing yourself to other strangers, perhaps. But you're there to pay homage to language, to make yourself a better writer. So they should. Well, what I try to do is also, I know I do. I create a comfortable atmosphere so they feel relaxed.
Yes.
And not stressed out. Okay, and that I think Oscar Wilde said even weaker poetry is written with sincerity. So I approach each poem with sincerity and respect. And I try to point out to the more beginning a writer, you don't do this, you don't do that. What good teachers do, we coach. Okay, we tell students what not to do. Okay, Robert Lowell said, teaching is learning what to leave out.
Huh.
And Hemingway took it another way. He said it differently. He said, you have to have a built-in crap detector. Okay, so this doesn't work. This doesn't work. But learn, it's not always what you put in, but it's what you take out. And again, poetry is about economy of expression. And what happens is in the class, if you're somewhat new at it, it starts to sink in all of the discussions we have. And I make sure everybody is respectful of everyone else, and that's usually the case. And we're all there to make our work better, and if you've been writing for years, you still want to make your poetry stronger. You want to hone in on what's going wrong. What do I do here? How do I make it more vibrant, more energized? And I try to tell students, no matter what stage they're at. And here's this other thing. There's this thing called talent. Okay, that everybody gets different amounts of. So I remember reading Nijinsky, the dancer. A reporter said to him, "You jump so high. How do you stay up there that long?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I jump up, I stay for a little bit, and then I come down." So basically saying is, I just do it, So there are people who have talent. And that's wonderful. But what happens is when you put the talent with craft, then you really have something that works and is wonderful, And I try to bring that talent out of everyone and hone in on the strengths, and maybe new approaches. And certainly turn them on to poets they don't know about and to read. And take some of what the so-called established writers do and put some of that energy into their own work,
There's so much to learn. I just, and touching the surface myself of studying the craft of poetry and so many poets to read. But I wanted to say that, I recently picked up your your book In the Eyes of a Dog, and I think it's one of your older collections, 2009 maybe, when this was published. And I was so delighted to discover a poem about Camden, Maine, which is obviously right next to Rockport, where you'll be teaching this summer.
Right.
And I wondered if I could ask you to read that poem.
Yeah, you know, I said to you earlier, I almost forgot that I read this poem. It's been so long. But some years back, I guess 2008 or something like that, I was watching television, and there was the lobster festival in Rockport, and it so happens I love lobster, and I said to Celia, I said, we're going to Maine because I want to eat lobster, and she's like, yes, let's do it. So we came up to the lobster festival. It was great. It was a great. You know, I fell in love with the area. I'd never been to Maine before, so we got a room in Camden, and I fell in love with the town. I thought, man, this is just beautiful. This is my idea of a New England town, a quaint New England town with a lot of fish. You know, so that's basically. And again, I was talking earlier about how my surroundings sort of trigger poems, and I knew that I knew I had to write about this particular town. I don't know if I got it all right, but certainly, I think as close as I could possibly get at the time. So Camden, that's, catchy title, right? Camden. For centuries, ocean bit into the coastline, rocks dripping from its surf along the shore before it left on every tide. In town, lobsters are on plates and shirts. Tourists walk on fish. Boats leave postcards to cast their nets, drop pots, and some carry the oars locals never use when they talk, and dumps them 2 miles out. In the leather shop, bags hanging on walls are faces of fishermen sleeping on boats anchored on canvas in the gallery windows along Main Street. In the park, a Union soldier rests on his musket, looking tired as granite, with the harbor and all his wars behind him. On the hill, the Methodist church wears a steeple on its clock like a wizard's hat. Every hour, its bells ring hosannas into the wings of gulls and rattles bowls of chowder until the next faithless man can at least believe in cod. And at night, when mist covers the moon, it's just another porch light kept on behind a screen. So whenever you leave home, you can always find your way back again. That's the first time I read that. I think, I don't know how long. It's nice to go back. The cheapest way to get back to Camden for me. Right?
It is, but you'll be back this summer.
Yes.
I just found it delightful. You got so much right, but it also just reminded me of all the wordplay, like cod and God. The first time I read it, I didn't see that. And then I read it out loud, and you read it out loud, and then the R's, going out to sea with the R's. And I realized as you read it, it was like oars, that you row with, and just the play that you have with all the words and images that you've incorporated in this poem. It's
Thank you.
so much fun.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it is, of course, I'm talking about how much work goes into it, but there is a lot of fun as well, because I am playing with the language, and like, oh, I can do this, I can do that, I can bend it this way. Oh, that sounds really cool. Cool is not a poetic term, by the way, but this sounds this, and again, you take risks. We're saying, let the next famous man believe in God. That's a risk to say, but it works. Look, it's a risk worth taking. It pays off, So, but thanks for making me read that. I hadn't read that in so long. After listening to it now, I'm thinking, oh, that's pretty good.
It is. It's great, and I really enjoy it. I want to ask you about the workshop that you're teaching this summer, but before I go there, I just wondered whether you have anything else that you really wanted to say about the writing process, about your writing or your life, that you want people to know about you? The Kevin that's
Well,
here.
that's a big question.
It is. It's a big question. The
oh,
secrets you don't want us to know.
Oh, in that case, you got an hour? No. Well, I mean, as far as his writing is concerned, there were times when I'm in a class, and there'll be students who back me up on this. I'm convinced that's where I belong. You know, I need to be there. You know, and to I love teaching and sort of coaching writers, and if I see the talent, boy, I really want to work with them. You know, I want to make something better and stronger. But I love working with language. I love getting in poems and moving around, you know, and seeing how it works, and listening to the poem, and et cetera, et cetera. And my teaching is as important as my writing. So I'm not a poet who happens to teach, or a teacher who happens to write poetry. To me, they're fused. They're together. They're of equal importance to me. So all the work that goes into my own work, it goes into my teaching. If that, you know, and that's, and I believe that, you know, I firmly believe in teaching classes. Here's the irony. I didn't think my life was going to turn this way. I might have said this before, but I never took a writing class in my life. Okay. I studied English literature, classical English literature. And I thought, well, you know, I'll teach literature on some level, maybe high school, maybe college. But I just never took, I had, you mentioned Richard Hugo. And this is the only teaching I've ever gotten. All right. I had sent him some poems. I don't know why I did that, but I fell in love with this work. I sent him some poems and a letter, how much I admired his work. Never thought he'd write me back. So he writes me back about 3 months later.
Wow.
And he says, so, yeah, you know, I enjoyed your poems. And if you want any advice, here it is. Write the next line because you, the poet, put it there. That's the quote. And that's the only instruction I ever got from anyone, you know, and I took that and used it. All right. But I never studied because I didn't think I was going to be teaching writing. I just sort of fell into it or tripped into it. I took a break after I got my master's in English Lit. And I thought, okay, I'll make some money for a bit. I'll teach high school for a little bit, go back, get my PhD. But I just started writing and started teaching. And again, the teachers for me, you know, their grad students say to me, well, who do you study with? Everyone said, who you study with? I go, well, I see Dylan Thomas, Wordsworth, and you know, Coleridge and Robert. Huh? And I said, yeah, I read, you know. And that's where the best teachers are, the bookshelf. You read. That's how, you know, if you don't read, you're not going to become a better, no matter how many classes you take, you have to read. And that's what I learned, you know. And then I would read interviews in some of the lit magazines to see how it was done. You know, the first class I had taught, I never taught before, you know, but I read how you do it. Okay. So that said, I've been teaching all my adult life, some formal writing classes, and I believe in them with all my heart. You know, you have like-minded people coming together to improve their lives and to improve their writing, and their writing improves their lives because it's a way of, of clarifying the world, you know. And when I talked before about writing during the pandemic, it helped me clarify the world, you know, that I had to live in. A personal confrontation with the world for me. That's what every poem is.